Hi, everyone. My name is Erin Craw, and I'm the Strategic Account Manager of Client Success, focusing specifically on the public sector here at U-Turn Health. My colleague Zach Goff is joining us today, who is the Director of Quality and Compliance here at U-Turn, has extensive experience in peer recovery coaching, and is a veteran himself. It's an honor to welcome our guest, Dave. He's on this podcast today, a veteran, has held various different positions within law enforcement. And Dave, instead of me just going through your long list of incredible experience, I'd rather just have you talk about yourself and kind of introduce yourself on here and talk about the experiences that you've had over the past, couple decades here.
Sure. So first and foremost, super grateful to be here. Thank you very much for having me on. I love doing these type of podcasts, especially given some of the things we're going to talk about today. So again, my name is Dave Weiner. A little bit about me: I spent roughly 27 years in law enforcement and military service. I spent 8 years in the Air Force, 4 on active duty, 4 in the reserves. I was a military policeman. I got out, went into civilian law enforcement, and as Erin is aware, I retired from my post at the VA. I was the regional chief of police and emergency management for the VA Long Beach healthcare system. After that, I started my own veteran-owned small business, in which we currently provide mental health and crisis intervention training for law enforcement and public safety agencies. I have a bachelor's degree in Homeland Security and Emergency Management. I have a master's degree in psychology, and I'm a contracted instructor for our veteran culture trainings for the LA County Sheriff's Department. So we'll just keep the list sort of right there. I think that's good. Gives everybody some context for what we're going to talk about today.
Incredible. Yeah. Thank you so much for going through that. And I know you've had obviously such a long career in law enforcement and you're serving both military populations and civilians. Can you describe some of your initial interactions from a law enforcement perspective with veterans? When you first kind of started on the job in a law enforcement way, how did those interactions differ from non-veteran encounters on the job?
So that's a very interesting question. And, when I first started my law enforcement career, I actually started in the United States Air Force. I was a military policeman. So I was kind of surrounded by, that military culture, that military, environment. But the policing really wasn't in that aspect different. It was in a lot of ways, though, it was really understanding your brothers and sisters. And understanding kind of some of the things they experienced, and I'll use one example. One of my really close friends, somebody that was a military policeman alongside me, was in Khobar Towers when it was bombed back in 1995. He was working the main gate, and after that, and rightfully so, he experienced. We lost a lot of good airmen that day, and he experienced a lot of mental health issues as a result of that. And at the time, sometimes it was hard to kind of wrap your head around, one of your partners having a challenge like that, right? But most of it was met with supportive, because we all were, I was deployed to Khobar Towers probably about 9 months before that occurred. So I knew the environment, I knew where he was, so I had a good frame of reference. And I would say trauma is trauma. When you ask the difference between military and non-military, I'd say trauma is trauma. However, I would say the causes are different. In the military, it's the military in a lot of ways. Your job and some of the things, your experiences are directly related to your military service. Whereas somebody in the community, their trauma could be from a variety of different things. So understanding that cultural nuance and that aspect of, it's likely that and again, when I say a lot of what we're going to talk about today, I'm speaking a lot in generalities. Okay. I always like to put that disclaimer out there, because there are always exceptions to things, but in general, a lot of the trauma that people face in the military is directly related to their military service versus somebody else in the community whose trauma is not. So hopefully that answered your question.
Absolutely. And that cultural component there, it sounds like it's such a really distinctive part of understanding the response from a law enforcement perspective. And I know this is your area of expertise and that you teach courses on this cultural element. Would you mind going into depth about what different, and I know that this is a whole course, so you can kind of trim it down, obviously, but the cultural elements that are so prominent when you are on the job in the law enforcement way, responding to a veteran, let's say that they're in a specific mental health related crisis?
So, first and foremost, I guess for me, I have an advantage, or my colleagues that are law enforcement officers that are also veterans. We have a slight advantage in the sense that we can directly connect to that veteran because of shared lived experiences in the military. And that makes it a little bit easier in that rapport building phase when you're first there. But I think it's also an understanding of, and you've heard me say this in class because you've been through my classes. You've heard me say you can't rush crisis. And that goes for anybody. You can't rush somebody through a crisis. So really slowing down and understanding like what's happening at that particular time is a key factor in doing so. But veterans, they trade in a commodity called trust, because trust is all you have in austere and combat environments and things of that nature. And I'll be very clear, I'm not a combat veteran, but have many friends, good friends, and family that are combat vets. And I would argue that in those cases, they're looking for someone to trust. And obviously, in a law enforcement capacity, you're supposed to be the trusted official. And in doing and engaging a veteran that's in crisis, you want to build that trust and build that rapport to the point where they want to do it because they want to do it, not because you're forcing them, and not because and it's about giving them time and space. And in talking to some of our folks that actually speak at our classes, that's exactly what they say. And they've shared their stories about being, involved in situations with law enforcement where they weren't given time and space, and the situation didn't go very well. So giving people time and space. And oddly enough, one of the cornerstones, and you know this too, we talk a lot about empathy and compassion, and using empathy and compassion to connect with that military veteran is key. And while that may sound strange to a lot of folks, like, wait a minute, isn't the military full of discipline and, orders and all of these things? You're absolutely right. That's why empathy and compassion are so important, because they're not getting any of that from the military, right? There's a complete lack of that. So giving them time and space, showing empathy and compassion, for what they've been through, and then working with them to find an equitable solution to whatever their challenges are.
And you have this incredible background and experience before you even started kind of interacting with from a law enforcement perspective. What are some ways, I know obviously you teach these incredible classes, what are some other ways that officers who maybe don't have military backgrounds or haven't had a lot of experience, maybe they're new on the job, what's the best way to kind of learn these really essential communication skills that you're talking about from a law enforcement perspective?
So I think first and foremost is being genuinely inquisitive, and starting at home and or your workplace, and connecting with either family, friends, people that you may already have established relationships with, and asking questions. Now there are a few things that are probably off limits when you're first starting to, asking questions like, hey, what was your job in the military? What did you do? Did you travel? Did you deploy anywhere? What was that like? I've never been to that country. Being genuinely inquisitive is great, but when you're talking in the context of somebody who served in combat, obviously the don'ts are, don't ever ask a combat vet if they killed anybody. That is a very insensitive type of thing, and there's a variety of reasons why. And most combat vets will avoid, if they don't readily know you or trust you, they're never going to answer that question for you. They're just not, because they're not in a place to. And that is a very, very personal thing for that. Now, again, exceptions, but the reality is that, those are, but there's so many other things you can ask, right? There's a ton of other things that you can, but being genuinely interested, tell me, what was being in the military like? I had thought of, I get a lot of people who say, hey, I was going to join the military, but it just didn't work out. Okay, cool. What was it like? What did you experience? My experience in the Air Force is very different from somebody who joined the Army or the Marine Corps. Just because each military service, as you're aware, has its own cultural component to it, right? So each service kind of administrates things a little bit differently. And those are the types of things that, you can engage somebody in the community and just asking, legitimate questions to really kind of better understand, like, what was that like?
So it sounds like too, Dave, what you're describing is just spending more time kind of building a relationship, maybe more so than you might have to with a civilian who maybe isn't a veteran.
Yeah, agreed. You do have to spend that time because, trust doesn't always come very easily. And for that person to really trust you, you're going to have to demonstrate. You're going to have to demonstrate that you're trustworthy with the information that you're receiving.
Sure, yeah. So just a different level of patience and time spent together. And I'm going to add an additional layer here, but what are some additional challenges? We know that, there's so much data out there kind of demonstrating that there's such a high rate of substance abuse disorders within the military veteran population. So how does that add this additional challenge when you're on the job and responding, and you kind of see this cycle of, coming in and out of maybe being incarcerated and homelessness, all of these different kind of additional challenges for military vets? How does that relate to your job as a law enforcement officer? And Zach, I'll have you jump in here too from a peer coach and recovery specialist on that end.
So I think you have to put, and I'll use alcohol as kind of the hallmark discussion piece, because in the military, alcohol is viewed as a celebratory and bonding type of activity. It's rarely frowned upon, and in some cases encouraged. And that is what that's for, celebratory and bonding. And it's usually associated with good times with your tribe, right? This is your people. These are people that you spend every single day and night with, working together, eating together, just being around each other. It becomes your family. And that is that's a celebratory activity. But what's interesting is veterans then get out of the military, and they lack that connectivity because now they're transitioning back into the civilian world, where they may not have as much connectivity with their tribe. And that alcohol then becomes, there's a transition that happens, or I believe that there's a transition that happens, that they try to achieve those same celebratory bonding kind of good feelings, even though they're not with their brothers and sisters. And unfortunately, then that turns into a problem. And it becomes a huge problem. And then it becomes more of, something to lean on. Well, I don't have anything else, and we all know that one of the risk factors for veteran suicide is isolation. So what do people do in isolation? They're going to try to do those things that they think are good for them. And, we were sharing a little bit before, as an example, but on the outside, that type and level of drinking is frowned upon, right? Just like a veteran's sense of humor. And I know I'm transitioning a little bit here, but when you're talking about things that veterans tend to have a very dark sense of humor, and it's used as a coping mechanism, just like the alcohol. It's there to cope with some of the things that they're dealing with. And having a very twisted or vocal sense of humor in your now civilian job is also, can get you in hot water, can get you and give you more challenges, for lack of a better term. And if people on the other side of it don't necessarily understand what's happening, they're likely to perceive it in a way that is not going to be beneficial for anybody involved.
Definitely, yeah. It seems like those coping mechanisms that you're talking about, it's adapting to now life outside of when you were in the military and how to do that. And Zach, I'm gonna let you kind of chime in here too in terms of your experience in the military, but also from a peer coaching aspect in terms of these additional challenges for a military veteran who also has a substance abuse disorder in some way.
Yeah, I think it goes back to the trauma aspect. I mean, 27% of veterans that have PTSD also have a substance use disorder. And then veterans who have PTSD are 67% more likely to be incarcerated. So all of those factors on top of the isolation that Dave was talking about, getting out, not having that tribe, getting out, not having all the resources, dealing with the VA, all of those things combined and correlate into higher incarceration rates. And then when they're incarcerated, they're getting out, those homeless vets aren't receiving case management. They're not working with a social worker. There's nothing actually being done on the micro level for the veteran. So I think that's where peer support comes in huge. And you actually have somebody that's been in their shoes. You kind of have that sense of a unit again, somebody that is another vet to walk side by side with you. I think it's the same thing with law enforcement too. Is law enforcement, they have a lot of different programs. Like here in South Carolina, we have something called SC LEAP, which is a peer support program. And officers that have substance use issues themselves, a lot of times they don't want to be seen walking into the same place that they've arrested individuals to send them to, where they're doing core treatment. So there's all these things where peer support comes into effect, that you need that sense of being a unit, being with your tribe.
Yeah, that sense of connection on both ends of just having someone who, I think too, Zach, what you're alluding to is like just someone who gets it, like just really can relate and who's been through kind of those day-to-day struggles, not even just looking big picture, but those days in between where things just don't make sense, or it's hard to do day-to-day tasks, or you can't relate to anyone else surrounding you. And one of my wrap-up questions for us today is to talk a little bit about where the gaps are in terms of improving veteran mental health. So obviously, both of you kind of talked a little bit about how it's so critically important to have your tribe, your people who understand, and isolation is such an important factor to consider. What are the other gaps here in terms of getting veterans who are, whether or not they're struggling with substance use disorder, whether or not they are homeless, where are those gaps? How do we kind of move forward and close those gaps as a community and these different roles that we have?
Well, I can hop in here. I think the biggest challenge right now is the silos that exist across a lot of the different enterprises, whether they're nonprofits, government agencies like the VA, counties, cities. There needs to be some barrier breaking and some tighter collaboration in communities. And I've seen firsthand, here in Los Angeles, and Aaron, I know you're out in this general area, and you've heard me say this in class, which is, I always ask our classes, do you think there are enough resources here in LA? And I'm just talking about LA. Do you think there's enough resources? And I get a lot of this. Oh no, there's not. Actually, we have a ton. We have the largest population of veterans anywhere in the country and military personnel. There's roughly 1.6-ish million veterans just here in California alone. And over half that's here in Southern Cal. So that being said, we actually have a lot of resources, but you wouldn't know it in some cases because everybody sort of holds on to their kingdom, fiefdom, whatever you want to call it, and don't necessarily want to share resources. And I think that's the biggest thing. And we've all heard that the old adage, it takes a village. And in this case, it does. It takes the entire village to address the mental health, substance abuse issues that our veterans and military folks, have. And, that collaboration between federal, state, local, nonprofit, private sector, all need to come together to work on these issues. That's just that I think is, to me, the biggest glaring issue.
And Dave, have you seen a progression? I know you've been doing this for a number of years. Have you seen a progression of departments wanting this training and bringing you in and saying, yes, we need this? Or has it been a little bit of a challenge? How would you describe that?
Well, I think when you look, we'll start nationally. Obviously there's a lot of things going on in law enforcement right now. But I don't think that is reflective of the law enforcement community at all. So nationally, what's really happening is every agency is having challenges recruiting, retaining. A lot of people are retiring. A lot of agencies are shorthanded. There are a number of agencies that are hosting our training well into the summer. I mean, our calendars are full in that aspect, but class sizes aren't as big as they probably should be, mainly because of staffing challenges are really, and one of the first things that always gets hit in any time of economic downturn, staffing challenges. Training tends to really default to the most basic of, like, what are our state requirements, as an example. We have to meet those state requirements. These other classes are a nice to have, which is fine, but at the same time, that does present a challenge sometimes, but there isn't a lack of desire, though. That's the thing. There are a lot of desire, and a lot of agencies have reached out to me to host our classes, but again, from a staffing perspective, they can say, hey, we can only send like 1 or 2 people. Okay. But if you get 10 agencies that send 1 or 2 people, then you start to fill up the class.
So it sounds like kind of a multifaceted issue there of the distinction between the desire from the law enforcement side and wanting to kind of build that skill set. And Dave, I remember being in class and sitting next to a few officers who were so excited to be there and to learn about it and didn't know, and it had several stories shared in class of, like, I didn't have this knowledge. And so it was upsetting when we were responding to calls and we felt like we couldn't help, or we didn't know how to help, especially when someone's in a crisis and that kind of thing.
And what's I'd say interesting, and you may have heard about this, and Zach, I don't know if you heard about this on the East Coast, but we had a Marine Corps vet who was also an LA County Sheriff's deputy who died by suicide, and he had done a couple tours, I think, down in Afghanistan, and that was a huge, but it was done in a very public format, and now, because of that, and because of my relationships there, and because I'm part of their mental health training cadre, there's a renewed emphasis on delivering these courses to not only the deputies, but their jail staff, their admin staff. Like, it's a bigger thing, and because there's so many similarities between first responders and veterans in general as it relates to mental health and other issues, it makes it easier to better understand veterans, because first responders have similar, experiences and with trauma, as an example. And I think that, to your point, I've gotten the same commentary, which is, why haven't we gotten this prior to this? And I'll coin a phrase that my good friend at the Sheriff's Department says. He goes, we didn't know we needed this stuff until we started having these encounters in the field, where we're encountering people and they weren't going well. And that's, unfortunately, when you find out you have a problem.
Sure. It's that waiting for something tragic to happen to kind of bring it to the surface.
Yeah.
I'm going to kick it back to Zach. Zach, do you have any other questions for Dave before we go ahead and wrap up here today?
Yeah, Dave. So here in Greenville, we have a huge amount of just wonderful veteran nonprofit organizations, and they're so heavily influenced within the community and law enforcement. They serve on different, drug and alcohol commission boards, city council boards. We have we do a great job at trying to mix the whole community together. And some of the things that they do for, like, identification of veterans is, we have vets that go to roll calls. We are in the detention centers. We are getting lists sent daily from each detention center in the upstate. We have officers that are designated within the departments that are calling out to some of these veteran caseworkers. So they meet a veteran, on site. Hey, I'm going to call and see if we can get somebody down here and try to mitigate the situation beforehand. What have you seen in your side of things when it comes to like identification of vets, getting there before, something bad happens and somebody ends up getting incarcerated?
So when I was still with the VA, I created a program called VMET, which was the Veteran Mental Evaluation Team, and it was patterned after our local agency's co-response teams. And that basically pairs, in the case of the Sheriff's Department, pairs a deputy sheriff with a mental health clinician. We did something very similar to VA, where I paired one of my VA police officers with a VA clinician, and they would co-respond with local law enforcement into the field. Now, I also would want to point out that both our clinician and our officer were both Marine Corps veterans. So they were able to go out and meet veterans where they are in the field when they're in crisis. And they were able to connect and then get them connected to the appropriate resources. Again, we have a ton of different resources here. One specifically that I will mention by name, which is our Veteran Peer Access Network. Earlier, Zach, you mentioned peer support being incredibly important, and I couldn't agree with you more. But our VPAN is a program that's based out of the LA County Department of Mental Health, and they do peer-led or provide peer-led resources, whether it's substance abuse, housing, counseling, you name it, they provide it to families. They don't care about discharge status. We all know that our dishonorably discharged vets have an incredibly difficult time finding work because of that negative stereotype of a dishonorable discharge. But even our VPAM folks will help and find resources for our dishonorably discharged vets. Doesn't matter whether you're homeless, unhoused, any of those things, they're able to provide those type of resources. So I think part of that is meeting veterans where they are. And all of them are going to be in different spots, but also working collaboratively with government agencies, to your point, going to roll calls. There's a lot of robust resources here in LA, and most of them, I would say, work pretty well together. But I think that the critical question to any organization, nonprofit, whatever, is what tangible resource do you provide? What is it other than you handing a pamphlet to somebody, and I make that distinction, information's great, but all organizations provide information. Outside of that pamphlet, what do you tangibly provide? Do you provide housing? Do you provide this? Do you provide that? Because a lot of times when we're in the field or have been dealing with somebody who may be experiencing homelessness, if you don't have the appropriate resources to house that person right away, or at least within a reasonable amount of time, you're not going to catch that person. You're just not. So it's about having a lot of those resources and making sure that they're available to you in the field. And that VMET program I was just sharing about has expanded quite heavily from the Long Beach VA to the West Los Angeles VA, and they work very collaboratively with the VA works with the Sheriff's Department. They work with the Department of Mental Health. There was a VPAN person, a VPAN manager that actually sat on the West LA VA campus to make sure that they broke that silo, and to make sure that all these agencies are working collaboratively. But I think, to your point, Zach, the peer-led stuff is incredibly important. You have veterans. VPAN hires veterans and veteran family members who have lived experiences that make it much easier for them to help navigate those veterans who might be having some challenges through whatever they need.
I think you're talking too about, those organizations being able to offer something tangible. I think from my experience, I've seen it even flows over to the peer support side. I mean, it's great to offer somebody an ear to talk to. But if they're homeless and, they don't know how they're going to eat that day, worrying about my substance misuse issue is probably the least thing of my concern. So like we've had to do a lot more case management, even with the peer support stuff. So like getting somebody into treatment, the VA, we know is going to take 30 plus days to do it. What type of backdoor ways can we figure out to try to help this person now and make them feel like somebody actually has their back?
Agreed.
So some key takeaways today, it sounds like too, this just collaboration has come up so much in our conversation in terms of just looking at things from all different angles and where people can help, and moving away from just having, a list of resources. When you said just like a piece of paper, I've talked to law enforcement officers who have said the same thing. Like, it's not enough just to hand me a pamphlet on depression or anxiety. That's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for, especially with these populations that are so skill based and so dedicated to helping others. They're a helping personality. And so just giving a piece of paper and saying, hey, there's a place down the street, moving away from that and learning how to better communicate in a way that's, here's the steps that we're going to take to help you. And I think, Dave, you've spoken to this numerous times before, even this podcast, about how it has to be an all hands on deck approach, and that there isn't one size fits all, which can be extremely challenging, I know, but you can't look at every veteran the same way. And I know that's something that you really, really, discuss and help from a cultural perspective. And it's been incredible. For those of you who haven't met Dave, he's a wonderful, wonderful person. I had the pleasure of being in 2 of his classes, and just the enthusiasm and passion for what you do is absolutely incredible. And thank you so much for chatting with us today, kind of going over these different challenges. And I know we talked about kind of hopeful next steps of how to improve support for our veterans who need help, who are maybe struggling with crisis in various different ways. And so I can't thank you enough. And Zach, thank you so much for joining us too.
Thank you both. I really appreciate being here today.
Thanks, Dave.
All right. Well, thank you guys. It was great talking with both of you. And you both had such obviously really invaluable perspectives. And Dave, I just, I've really honored our relationship since I met you. So thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Of course, not a problem. I'm actually teaching today.
Oh, get out. Okay.
Later on today,
Awesome.
the LA Community College District has the largest population of student veterans anywhere in the country.
Oh, wow.
Like,
I
we
didn't
seem
know
to
that.
have,
Wow.
yeah. Well, so the captain, and I don't know if you ever met Captain Gannon. He was
I
over.
think so.
So when you came through our classes, he was in charge of the MET teams out here, the co-responders.
Okay.
He promoted and they moved him over to College Bureau. So when he landed there, and when he found out they have a large veteran student population, he promptly called me up and said, I want all of my people trained, all of my people here, which security officers, et cetera. So we've been having the veteran resource centers attend our classes from the colleges.
Oh, wow.
They have 9 campuses. So each of their VRCs have been sending their veteran resource center folks. Their deputies, their security officers, their administrative folks are all going through our training. So we're catching swing shift today.
Okay.
We're trying not to incur that overtime.
Yep.
So, meeting those folks where they are, but all of those folks have been very receptive. And what's interesting is people will come to the class initially with their arms folded.
Sure.
Like,
Yep.
hey, I have to be here kind of thing.
Yep.
But as you get into class, I think what ends up happening is people have a vision in their head of what this class is going to be. And then
Sure.
when they leave, they have a very different perspective.
Yeah.
Of what it was.
Sure.
Because luckily for me, our course evaluations are very, very consistent.
That's great.
And I've even had people ask me, why isn't this like mandatory in the academy? Why aren't we getting this?
Yeah. I thought the same thing in my brain when I was listening to you. And I think, that speaks so much to your teaching too, because every ride along I've done, the first thing people talk about is how they hate training. So if they love your training, I know for a fact that's really speaks to your teaching.
Well, and that's the interesting, and there's, and I know you and I haven't chatted for a while, but there's been a lot of things that are starting to materialize. So back on Veterans Day this past year, and Zach, I'd be interested to hear your perspective on this. So I have a buddy of mine, he works for the LA County Board of Supervisors. He works for our 5th district supervisor, Catherine Barger. And our supervisors are very supportive of veteran related board motions. So this past Veterans Day, they passed 3 very specific motions. One had to do with veteran homelessness and housing, to provide more resources and those type of things. The other one had to do with veteran employment and entrepreneurship, dedicating more resources and programming. The last motion that was introduced was to provide basically our trainings to public safety agencies all over LA County.
Wow, that's incredible.
Now,
Oh.
all of those measures passed unanimously 5-0.
Wow.
So, which I thought was interesting. So now what they're doing is they're looking at grants. They're looking at a lot of different things, which would obviously pull us in and have us do this training across our county to not only police, but fire, EMS, dispatchers, you know, kind of the whole gamut. You said you're in North Carolina, right? Does your county or city leadership get involved in any of these conversations, like from a programming?
Sure. Yeah.
That's good.
So the veteran nonprofit that I worked for, the chief operating officer, she was lieutenant for 16 years. Her husband's the chief of police, and he's fantastic. So everybody is hugely engulfed in the community. So
That's
super
great.
veteran friendly. And we have, like you said, there's a bunch of resources, but some don't always see eye to eye. And it's more like I want to keep this close to the chest. And I mean, the VA contracts out for a lot of those homeless housing shelters.
Yeah.
So you have, like, I know one we have here, used to be a Bureau of Prisons halfway house, and it got closed down. And then the VA started contracting through the company, and that's where they house them. And it's not the best place.
So for your incarcerated vets, we have what we call out here jail diversion. Where basically, you know, if a veteran, you know, gets in something, you know, they can defer charges, you know, and get them into the appropriate care system. But are you guys working with any of the VJOs, the Veteran Justice Outreach folks?
Yeah, I actually was the coordinator for both county veteran treatment courts. So I'm super close with our VJO. She's fantastic. But again, she's one person serving 10 counties.
Yeah, and that's the problem, resourcing, you know. You definitely need more of those without a doubt. I'd say I think the West LA facility has 9 VJO coordinators, mainly because we have, in 2020, the last count we had when we were talking to California Department of Corrections, we had 6,600 incarcerated veterans here in California.
I could see that.
Wow.
And that was just one facility that has you know, like 9 VJOs. That's not enough.
Our largest county in the upstate, we have about 60 vets a month that go through the detention center. So roughly across the board, 100. So not nearly that type of volume, but it's still, when you only have one, and she can't get into all the facilities at all. So I would go probably once every 2 weeks to each one, get a list and see who's actually still in the detention center, meet with them, see what type of case management you can do. But a lot of times they're in there on no bond. They're waiting for a court date. You can't really do a whole lot until they're out.
Yeah. And but I think that's probably the more important part is when they're getting out. So they have kind of a softer landing so they don't end up back there. That's the whole idea. But to your point, a lot of that coordination should be done long before they actually get out, you know, and that's where some of that disconnect is.
And I think that a lot of that goes to the in-facility programming. And right now, like since COVID, there's programs are just nothing right now.
Yeah.
In the detention center. So like we work with Mecklenburg. So Aaron's just kind of recently moved over there. They have an incredible, like, entire unit in the that has an 8-week substance use treatment program. And they can get out, they get phones, they get like 3 months worth of paid transitional housing. Like, when I think about counties, not only on veteran, you know, subjects, it's like, that's how you do it. You actually have to invest into recidivism if you want to see it happen.
Yeah, 110%. 100%.
So
Definitely, yeah. Long way to go, but there are definitely some counties, like Zach was saying, that we see that are this is
Yeah.
the model. So hopefully things will get a little better. I know it takes time, but thank you guys again so much. I'm so
course.
glad that both of you got to meet too and kind of
Yeah.
connect. And like I said, Zach, Dave is awesome, doing great things. So good to see you.
That's
Have an
right.
awesome class.
Likewise.
We'll make sure we get that clip for your wife.
Thank you. I
Good to
appreciate
see you
that.
guys. Have a good one.
Have a
Talk
great
to you
day.
soon. You too.
Bye.
Thanks, Dave. Bye.